So we'll get right into our presentation today. Or Rhonda, who should use Zoom first? So, take it away.
Okay, so we're really happy to be here. Yakima Neighborhood Health Services, first of all, for those of you who don't know us, this is our mothership. We're located almost across the street, about a block up. But we are a member of the Homeless Network of Yakima County. And so first and foremost, what I want to tell you is that the project that we're talking about is a collective effort of the Homeless Network of Yakima County. We've been working on a 10-year plan to end homelessness. We started with an effort on the county and the city. In about 2005, we grouped as many organizations in a collective effort to really, in a concerted effort to reduce homelessness in Yakima County. So the projects and the efforts that I'm talking about really are a joint effort among many organizations. So this is just a brief summary of who our organization is. You probably know we primarily provide primary care to low-income and uninsured individuals, although anyone is eligible to come to see us. On the right-hand side, you'll see is sort of a focus on our homeless populations. About 10% of the people that we see are homeless individuals and families. And a big part of what we do also provides housing and supportive services, basic needs assistance, hygiene supplies. A big share of what we do now comes out of our services at the depot, formerly the Greyhound Depot, which is one of our service sites now. One of the things that has happened through our evolution is the backgrounds of many of the people that we see, common stories that we hear from our populations, and where they come from. A lot of our patients suffer from these issues that you see on the left: human trafficking, violence among their family members or the patients themselves. A lot of the people that we see are victims of rape or assault. Many of them come out of our local jails. And how that shows up in our exam rooms and from our providers, they get labeled with issues of noncompliance, being antisocial, being labeled as disrespectful or breaking policies. And these are issues that our staff and the providers, our physicians, social workers are dealing with on a daily basis. On the bigger picture in Yakima County, one of the questions that we get and that we've had in many of our discussions is, what's our homeless problem in Yakima? How big is it compared to around the state? And this is one of the charts that are put together by the Department of Commerce. The lighter green shows that on the scale we're actually faring pretty well in our efforts. This is a recent graph by the Department of Commerce that we're really improving compared to around the state. We don't have near the homeless problem that other parts of the state have. The darker the green, the darker the color, the larger the homeless concentration compared in population to other parts of the state. This is another chart that shows of the total homeless population. We're in the lower half in terms of homeless populations compared to other counties in Washington state. And then this chart here, you can see where the arrow is. This is talking specifically about unsheltered people. As in terms of the percentage of the unsheltered homeless, we have really worked hard, particularly in the last few years, to get those who are unsheltered off the streets and finding places for them to stay. So we've really made huge numbers in this particular effort over the last few years. So again, since the homeless network came together, we've continually been able to reduce the number of homeless in our communities over the last 10 years. And this is just another portrayal. The top line is the total number of homeless, and then the bottom line is the number of unsheltered homeless. So it's one of the questions that we get a lot in terms of how do we compare to other communities around the state. So in terms of our organization, where some of our services are, this is our Sunnyside office. We just recently completed an expansion. We're located on Schoon Road in Sunnyside. If you've been to the Yakima Southeast Community Center, we opened a site inside the Southeast Community Center at the beginning of 2013, and our facility staff did an update inside there. And so this is our clinic. We have 4 small exam rooms in there. We partner with many organizations. On the left here, this is our dedicated healthcare for the homeless clinic, and here we're located inside of Triumph Treatment Services. We face the transit center, so we really are in a part of the neighborhood where the homeless, where there is a high concentration of homeless. And then we also have a clinic inside Central Washington Comprehensive Mental Health. Again, a high-risk, high-need population. We go where the people who need us the most are, and we've been located inside Comprehensive Mental Health for about 3 years now. And then we also partner with private landlords. We master lease from a couple of different landlords so that we can provide services, both housing and healthcare, for homeless populations. In this particular facility, this is one of our medical respite facilities. And so this is for homeless patients who are sick but not sick enough to be in the hospital, and for those that are coming out of the hospital but not well enough to be back on the streets. And this happens to be a private apartment building motel unit that we lease from a private landlord. And then we have a couple of housing units of our own for transitional and permanent supportive housing for formerly homeless individuals, where we provide supportive housing and transitional housing as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Greyhound Bus Depot. These are just illustrations of buildings that Neighborhood Health owns and or operates, and then our staff maintain the facilities as well. So about a year ago, the Homeless Network asked us to be the lead organization in developing a community service center and a permanent warming shelter, overnight warming shelter, specifically targeting the chronic homeless and those unsheltered who we were still struggling with to find more safe and secure housing for. We had identified a few locations in the area that we thought would be possibilities, and so together we worked. Together we consulted, or I asked the Office of Rural and Farm Worker Housing to consult with us on a development plan, and identified a few locations. We began working with the city of Yakima, because the locations were all in the city, and talking with city staff and the planning staff, and actually there were a couple of city council people that were involved as well, and started talking about some of the locations we had in mind. There were locations actually real close to here. There was one on 10th Street, there was one up on 3rd Avenue, and then the Royce Market over on 6th Street. One of the suggestions that came out of the early meetings was, have you talked to the neighbors in those areas? And so we did. We developed a staff survey, and I'll show you kind of the questions here in just a second. And then we have 7 of our outreach workers that we deployed basically to the 2 neighborhoods that kind of came out on top, and asked them to go out, and they did. In early April, all of our staff went out. They completed 77 surveys, and within a 300-foot parameter, which is I think what the municipal code had indicated that we should do around each of the 2 sites. And these are that might be very difficult to read, but the survey basically asked some very specific questions about all of the residents that were in that 300-foot parameter, about where the people that were living there, and their opinions about first of all just whether they think we have a homeless problem in Yakima, and if there was a need for a shelter, and what kinds of services should be there. So the couple of the pictures here kind of show what that 300-foot parameter looked like, and primarily what you'll see is that around the 6th Street neighborhood, these are primarily houses and residents, and then the other neighborhood around 3rd Avenue is much more industrial. And what the 6th Street neighborhood is just about a couple blocks away from where we are, and I can tell you from where we are over on 8th Street, we have homeless, particularly the unsheltered homeless, living and staying. I guess living is a challenging word, but occupying our neighborhood. We know them by name, and what we found and our staff found was that was not unlike the rest of our neighbors in the neighborhood in terms of knowing and recognizing what the issues were. Fairly receptive to the idea of recognizing a need for people to be and reside during the day. They need a place to go to the bathroom, they need a place to do their private business, and just recognizing that there was a need for people to hang out to be off the streets. The 3rd Avenue, which was very interesting, and the people that were interviewed in these residents and businesses had some observations that we just hadn't recognized. It's a much more industrial area, comments like the people that they see in those areas, they worry about forklifts and industrial equipment and people in the dumpsters or behind the dumpsters and the danger to the homeless. There was a lot of compassion and empathy, but it was from a very different perspective of the danger to more the people that were hidden in those areas. So very different perspectives of the two neighborhoods. And so we brought the surveys back, and clearly after evaluation and you know, looking at also the service delivery that we were talking about, landed on the Royce Market as being the most logical place where we wanted to develop this service center. In terms of what the ideas are that we were looking at for services, and we talked about this the other night when we were talking at the city council hearing as well. The service center is, if you've ever had reason to either go by or come visit us at the depot, the services that we provide at the depot are a true service center. When somebody comes in there, they may come in asking for a specific service, but what happens is they really receive an assessment of overall need. That we're talking to them about. They may come in because they're about to get evicted, but we're asking them much more about what their overall needs are. How we can help them either in better planning or what their overall services are, and they're also have the opportunity to talk with a counselor, look what other needs they have for them or their families, and then develop a plan on potentially how to mitigate or how to prevent that service from happening or that condition from happening in the future. We have a goal, a case management model that we've adopted throughout the network of a self-sufficiency model. And so we're trying to identify what strengths they have that they can build on to help them stabilize their situation into the future. And that's the model that we see as building, again, through the community service center. The overnight component is one of the components, but it's certainly not the driving force. But if we had the ideal model would be basically what we're doing at the depot, but it's got an overnight warming shelter component as well, so that people would have a place to stay overnight as opposed to having to leave. Then we would also add an ability to be able to provide food and a meal while they're at the shelter there as well. Our partners would also be part of this through the Homeless Network. We work very closely with many of the other social service organizations, as we do now, and they would be able to come in and link up with the clients that they may be working with. We're not duplicating services. We're not bringing a lot more additional of their services into the service center, but rather it's a place to connect with them and then help them engage into the services, which is why being part of the neighborhood where we're currently providing services is so ideal. It's a cost-effective method of providing services. So again, I mentioned how we work from a model of self-sufficiency, and the self-sufficiency matrix is a tool we've all used for many years, and this is it's difficult to see, but what it shows you is how we measure our progress, both for all of our case managers, but the self-sufficiency model is where we look at these different domains of things like healthcare and income and employment, childcare, community living, and when we bring people in, we gauge them, and they gauge themselves on a scale of 0 to 5, and then every 6 months we do a follow-up assessment to see how we're making progress, and we do this with the family, with the heads of household. And it's a measure of progress to be able to see how we're showing improvement over time. And it's been a very effective tool for the network to be able to show areas where the families themselves or the individuals are making progress. You know, these are just a couple of shots on where people are living now. And this is in our neighborhood. And you know, any given day you can go, or every morning as we're coming to work, we find people living on the streets and sleeping on the streets. So I'm going to let Nate talk a little bit now about a couple of the other studies we've done.
Sure. Thank you, Rhonda. So alongside of the survey that Neighborhood Health performed in the neighborhoods, we also wanted to take a look at what existing facilities and services there are for the homeless in Yakima, and how that might affect any proposed new site or new services that we're looking at. And what we did is a mapping exercise in and around the areas that we were interested, particularly the 2 sites that kind of came to the top in this process. And you can see what we identified was sort of clusters of resources. Is there a lead on here? Yeah. All right. So you can see there's really kind of a bunch of resources for the homeless around the downtown area, but they tend to go in certain clusters. And obviously, if people are receiving services in that area, especially if they're homeless, there tends to be more people in that area. And so we took a look at that, and then we also took a look at what that would mean in terms of traffic patterns, pedestrian traffic patterns for the homeless, assuming most of them do not have cars, which routes they would be taking in and around the downtown. You can see with the 3rd Avenue site, what we're essentially doing is we're drawing people from the services through the downtown and up near 3rd Avenue, and conversely, with the Roy's Market site, we're actually keeping people further away from the downtown and near the services that they need. One of the reasons this was important was really we wanted to have a place for the homeless to be able to access the services that they need without having to find a ride somewhere, which is often very difficult during the day. Or we've had a lot of feedback that even buying a bus pass, which is what, $250, something like that, that can be very difficult. And so having services close enough that they can be accessed is really important. And then the final thing is it really helps keep the day-to-day business of the businesses in downtown away from the need of having to shoo someone off the front porch or deal with providing services that really we have services that can handle for the homeless population. And so looking at the Roy site, there's a couple of misperceptions that we've had. One is that it is an empty site. That's not actually true. There is an active business there. It's hard to tell from the outside. It's a very tagged up building. Or the inside, actually. But there is an active business there. But it's seen a lot of disinvestment over the last few years, in the last decade especially. There used to be an active laundromat in the back of the property. One of the proposals that we've made is that we would like to refurbish that and reopen that for the neighborhood. There's a lot of additional parking around this site, and we've talked about trying to create some green space for the neighborhood. We put together, this is just an early conceptual rendering, so nobody hold this to us when we do the final design, but this is indicative of the ideas that we're trying to ascribe to this site. Creating outdoor space where the homeless can be outside, but still away from having to stay on people's front porches or front lawns, places where they can get the air and still be safe. One of the major issues when you're homeless is that you're exposed all the time, and when a predator shows up, you really have very little recourse. This is a place that would be monitored 24/7. It would allow people to just feel safe for a moment, for as long as they need. And as you can see, it's been really fun to work with the neighborhood health because they take a lot of pride in their facilities. And one of the things that was A1 on the priority with this is that we want this building that has been seen as a liability for the community to become an asset, to be visually attractive, to create positive frontage along the walkways, to be well maintained so that there's no tagging or graffiti or things like that on the site. And so that when people drive by, they say, oh, here's something that's actually contributing to the neighborhood rather than as an eyesore. And then one of the final things that I want to say is that for our office, working with the homeless is relatively new. Our day-to-day, we're working more in rural communities. We're working with farm workers and other populations. But we've learned a lot in a very short process here, and it's been really great to work with neighborhood health because they are the experts. They've been doing this for almost 40 years now. There's an incredible wealth of knowledge that comes along with that, alongside actually being able to talk about the homeless by name, which has been really fun to be able to sit in meetings and actually talk about real people. And the last thing is that you know, all the charts that Rhonda was showing is the bottom line is it's working. We're actually seeing a significant decrease in the homeless population in Yakima. It's a positive trend. It's one we want to see continue. And it's one that actually saves taxpayers money. That's one of the things that often doesn't get talked about. But when people are brought into housing, that means less hospital visits. It means less calls to police for, you know, attacks by predators and things of that nature. Starting with housing first in terms of bringing people out of homelessness is a model that's worked all across the country. And if anyone wants to talk about that more, I've been digging into that because I'm really interested and excited about what that means for Yakima as well. So that's it.
That's what I would say, and it's been obvious in the presentation that you heard, that this is not a model of, this is not the model that you see where it's just a place for people to come and hang out and have a safe place to sleep. This model is about getting people into a safe place, getting them a shower, getting their laundry done, keeping them safe, and lifting them out of homelessness. And a lot that goes along with that. You know, how do you get people, and so we're working with our partners that, as Rhonda described, so that people can be in a safe place while they're going through rehab, while they are learning how to write a resume, helping them get to a job interview, helping them learn that it seems so obvious, I'm sure, to everybody in this room, but teaching people, you don't, if you're a renter, you don't punch holes in the wall. You don't pull the sink off the wall. And we've had huge success with this. We have a lot of, one of the reasons you see such a decrease in number is, unbeknownst to most people, we have housed homeless people all over this neighborhood. And we have staff that go there every week and inspect, and if they have done damage, then the staff hold them. They have to repair that damage, and they have to do that in front of our staff. If they misbehave, they learn that the day the rent is due is the day the rent is due. It's not due sometime, it's due on the 5th. And these are things that seem so obvious to most of us, but they're foreign to people who've never had the model or had the experience. So everything here is not about housing the homeless. It's about keeping the homeless safe and lifting them out of homelessness and getting them into productive work and becoming productive citizens and their families, and keeping their children. I mean, I can't remember what is the percent that when we counted last year of those we counted that were children, but it's a huge percent. You know, your child has to go to school every day, and we are there to back that up. That child is going to school, and the importance, and when you have an interview with the teacher, yes, you get in this car and you go with me and you go to that interview. You've got to be part of your child's education. All the things that are just ordinary to the rest of us, but somehow they have to learn the importance of it. And our staff have just, I'm so proud of them. They've just had tremendous success with family after family, and it's one person, one family at a time. And going to that, we know the homeless by, there's 6 gentlemen that sleep on my porch at the Ritchie house every night. And I'll just tell you a little story. So a couple weeks ago, I had an appointment, and it was on a Saturday morning, and the only time this person could meet with me was at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. So I showed up about 7 o'clock, and Joe says to me, as he kind of turns over, because usually they get rousted off my porch by staff around 6 in the morning, 6 or 6:30. So it's 7 o'clock, and he looks up and he goes, "Anita, you never come to work this early on a Saturday. What are you doing here?" And pretty soon you realize that not only do I know Joe's name, but Joe knows my name. I was kind of taken aback that Joe knew my name. And we chat all the time. But you know, these are our veterans, these are our children, these are our elders. These are our people, and all we want to do is is lift them up and give them a shot. Somehow, some way, if a bankruptcy, a divorce, who knows, an illness, there's any number of things, and all of a sudden, just being homeless has become, surviving and staying alive all day and all night has become the full-time job. And if we can help with that a little bit. The other thing that I would add before we ask questions is around that neighborhood, as most of you know, the homeless are really clustered. The neighborhood health, the patients didn't originally come to neighborhood health. Neighborhood health went to the people. And that was how it ended up being located there. That's where, 40 years ago, that's where the need was. That tends to continue to be where the need is. It was interesting, as I read the surveys that the staff brought back, that interesting and surprising that the people who live in the neighborhood don't feel threatened by the homeless. They feel threatened by gangs and other groups, but they don't feel threatened by the homeless. What they feel is inconvenienced and annoyed that there's this person who's having to do their bodily functions on their front lawn, or that sort of lost the respect and will do it right in against a tree right in front of one of their children, and that hopelessness that's there, and but they're not afraid and they're not threatened by it. They're just sort of exhausted sometimes by the presence. And I think that's an important piece, because people tend to think that maybe they're afraid or they're threatened or their children are threatened, and that is not what we've been told. And I wasn't sure about that until we actually went out into the neighborhood and started asking people. But they do welcome the idea that there's a place for them to go where they can answer the call of nature someplace besides in the alley and on their front porch. So a place where they can sleep and be taken in. So it's an exciting project.
I'll kick off some of the questions here, and then anyone who'd like to. Two things. First, I've heard the concern expressed that if you build more facilities, you will attract more homeless to the area. Do you have any data on that, and is that a concern that you could address? And then second, maybe you walk through the state of the permitting issue that folks.
I think our charts just showed that it's one of the reasons that we included the charts in the presentation, is that we have developed services, again, as part of our planning process through the network based on the need and with an eye toward reducing homelessness. And I think our charts have shown that we've done just that. So in terms of the planning process, what do you guys answer that?
So the state of the current planning process is we have a complete application that's been submitted to the city. It's being reviewed right now, and the question is out to the city right now. If they need more information, we're waiting on them to hear about that. So that maybe people understand, we actually have been working with the city for almost this entire year. We first met and talked about the Roy site in April. We conducted this survey and presented that to the city. We've talked with city staff multiple times about what the best process would be to move forward, and have been working very close with them to figure out what the right track is. One of the significant issues that caused some of the concerns that we've seen in the media now is that the idea of a homeless shelter or a mission or something of this nature has really not been directly addressed in the city zoning ordinances. And so it's, I guess, depending on how you look at it, it's either allowed in every zone or it's not allowed in any zone. And it's a little bit of a simplification of the system, but it's been a lot of sort of hard thinking about how do you go about properly interpreting the existing zoning ordinances towards what's being proposed here. And we've been very careful to follow all the steps and the recommendations made by the city in terms of that process. We want to do this right. We've been providing everything that we can to them so that they can make an informed decision. We were hit a little bit sideways by the timing of an emergency moratorium that was passed 4 hours after we had submitted our application. We weren't quite sure how that fit in the broader perspective, but we're also working with the city to figure that out as well. Ed?
I have a question, and I don't know if this is the right phrase or not, but it appears to me that this was a rush to judgment. In the fact that Tony brought this up and there is some statute or something that says that this is not applicable in certain zones within the city. Now there's a moratorium until April. And it just seems logically to me that we don't need this in April, we need this today. Is there any,
Yes.
and I, in deference to Joan, and I mean nothing to Joan at all, but that's the perception that I have by
Yeah.
watching the city council.
Well, maybe I can say something and then Joan can follow up if she needs to
Before
clarify.
Joan follows up, I've got a couple of questions I want to ask her too, so she can answer his and mine both.
Okay. Sure. First of all, yes, the emergency moratorium came out of the blue for us. We were not informed that was going to be on the city agenda. We didn't know that we needed to have anything ready or prepared for that. There are processes for handling uses that are currently unclassified. We actually, as we were looking at the city code, believe that what we're proposing actually fits fairly well with the definition of a community center, which is in the code and is allowed in this zone as a Class 2 use. And so we were pursuing that track, but also wanted to afford the ability, if it was considered an unclassified use, that we could also follow the process for that. We submitted both those applications because that's the proper process as it exists. And then when the emergency moratorium came into effect, or was proposed, it sort of created this, I think, layer of confusion about whether or not there was an actual process in place that we could follow to have this reviewed properly. And that's not the case. There is a process in place, and that's what we were following. And that's what we're continually following. To answer the second question, our application for review was submitted and accepted by the city before the date that the emergency moratorium was implemented. And so we are going to continue with that review process with the ordinances as they existed previous to the moratorium. So the current moratorium does not apply directly to the application that we have in process right now. However, it does bring up the larger issue, which we actually think is really important to discuss, that there is sort of a missing piece to the zoning ordinances that exist around homeless shelters and facilities.
So where does Roy's Market fit into what you just said?
The Roy's Market application is currently being reviewed under the code previous to the emergency moratorium taking effect. I've been told not to use the word vested because that's apparently a technical word that means something else. So we're not technically vested, but we are. Our application is being reviewed under the original zoning ordinances.
I want to add something to that.
Go ahead.
My name's Glenn Rice. I've been around this for years as a housing advocate, as one of the originators of the housing program in the city. Community development director, a long time before she was, sits at city manager, and so on. I'm offended by this kind of activity of emergency moratorium. I think that's strictly political. Has no basis for anything other than that. Second, these zones, these things like this market and some other small ones around the city, were actually spot zones, not necessarily good planning, but allowed because they existed some 25 or 30 years ago. And they met a need rather than disenfranchise a local neighborhood grocery in favor of pushing everybody to a shopping center, these kinds of things being. So my question to Joan is, rather than making all this fuss and going through all of this, why wasn't it considered to create a planned unit development on this site? Why wasn't it considered that you keep some aspect of the laundry, a grocery, a mailbox site, a telephone thing or something as part of the original project, and make the secondary use homeless shelter apartments, however you want to phrase that, talking about vesting, yes, I think there is a vesting in the site for the commercial use. And there's no need to have something that's less intensive denied, which the housing would be less intensive than the commercial use, and forced to go through this kind of a moratorium process, in my view. When I look at this neighborhood, many of us, Anita being first amongst many that I've dealt with, and I'm very proud of what you all have done. The housing office itself, the city's commercial office up the street or down the street about 2 blocks from her office. We ran that starting in 1975 to provide low and moderate income housing for the people throughout the community, and basically in the east side of Yakima. And that's where the people are. You can talk about spreading people other places, but economic factors dictate where people go. And we're a community of a lot of low and moderate income people. There may be aspects on the council and the staff that want to change us into something more, and that's admirable. I appreciate that. But we are what we are. We must deal with the people we have, because there are people, as Anita said. So I would hope that there'd be some other kind, I mean, maybe it's too far down the road, which I think is kind of a sham. But I really think the planned unit development, the combined use of the laundry, grocery, the homesteaded, engineered, whatever you call it, invested thing still has some value. These kinds of uses need to be where people are served. Somebody said there's transportation, there's housing, there's health, there's entertainment, there's access, all those things there. There's churches from this location. To put that in an industrial zone will screw up the industrial zone. He'll tell you that. He's an industrial kind of guy. You don't want those industrial zones either. It creates more of a problem than it solves. Here we have wide streets, sidewalks, and opportunity.
I don't want to cut you off, but I know that we're already a little over time.
I don't care.
And I'm hearing committee and I do. And I want to give Ms. Davenport a chance to
I've
respond.
not been around for about 10 years or said much. But I feel passionate about this issue. I want to see it corrected as a citizen. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Can I ask
Please.
and I don't want to make this into a debate, because I do not feel that this is a debate. With all due respect, Mr. Rice hired me 29 years ago, so we're that soft spot in my heart. But I guess I just want to, number one, explain where we are in the process and what the course of action is right now. The neighborhood health application was accepted as meeting the minimum requirements for processing. We took it in 2 days before the moratorium took in effect, and we said we're gonna run with this. State law gives us 28 days to review applications for this. We were very committed to making sure that this one at least got processed. All of the lawyers have said, don't use the word vesting, because vesting means that you're entitled to a building permit, and that's not where we are in the process. Where we are in the process is that the neighborhood health application is entitled to a public process. That's where we are. The moratorium that took effect a week ago, now less than a week ago, affects only the small convenience center zoning district. Unfortunately, Roy's Market is in a small convenience center zoning district. We prepared a couple of maps. This is not a real visual map, but you'll see 17 little spots on this map, and those are all the locations where we have small convenience center zoning districts. Roy's Market is extremely unique in that it is only a one property zoning district. It's, and that's all there is. Most of the other zoning districts that you'll see here are like West Park. There are larger areas that are classic neighborhood shopping centers, and the purpose and intent of the small convenience zoning district is primarily for neighborhood shopping. It's not to put a big box retail in it. It's for neighborhood shopping, and as has been discussed, the Royce Market, IGA, whatever it was back in the day, was a true classic neighborhood market. But the commercial conditions changed, and those little markets have gone away. They're now 7-Elevens and whatnot, and the grocery stores have replaced the neighborhood markets. So, it's not been a viable grocery store in many, many years. But the small convenience center zoning district, and I really had very little to do with the idea of, let's do a moratorium. That was counseling by our legal staff to tell the manager and the council, look, this is one way to get out of this, or to, not to get out of it, but to process this application from running too fast. Because, as was stated, we do not have a zoning ordinance that addresses what to do with homeless missions. Now, we go back a long time ago, in 1992, when the Union Gospel Mission wanted to move from Front Street, and they had several locations that they were interested in moving. I think you were community development director, and I was young planner at that point. We had, they were looking at two locations, the Goodyear building up on MLK, and one prominent restaurateur, Mr. John Puccinelli, came to the city and said, that is not a community center. So he challenged us. At that point, we were processing missions as community centers. He challenged the city and prevailed, and got a hearing examiner decision, and 2 years of process that then unfolded to say, okay, well, what the Union Gospel Mission does is a mission. It's not a community center. And he wrote the hearing examiner wrote two interpretations that go back again to 1992 and 1995 that said a mission is a permitted use in the red zone, which is our CBD zone, in the pink zone, which at that point was called Central Business District Support, but it's now called General Commercial, and in the gray area, which is called the M1 zoning district. So those were the three districts that were a mission could be located in. And I guess you and I together probably can't say why in 1992 and 1995 we never put it in the zoning ordinance. I don't know if there was other issues out there, or if we just figured, we're done with that one, we don't have to worry about it again. But for whatever reason, we did not put it in the zoning ordinance. So now we have an application that says we have an important community use that we want to put here, over here, because it's convenient to lots of other issues. There's 3,000 parcels that are in these three zoning districts. And unfortunately for me and for us, the location that you're working with is not in those zoning districts. It's in a zoning district that is not listed.
So, can I just follow up, because I think there's two important things for everyone here to know, is that there's actually two now parallel.
Let me address that. Okay. Because we have two things going on.
Yep.
And the first one is that the neighborhood health application is entitled to a process. They have volunteered to do a Class 3 public hearing in front of the hearing examiner. And at this point, it's not been scheduled because, and I don't want to say we rushed to accept your application, but we reserve the right to ask for additional information to make sure that it meets the technical requirements that are necessary. And that's where we are right now in the technical review. We expect you'll actually end up in a public hearing in front of the hearing examiner in February, is my best guess. The second thing that's happening is directly related to the moratorium. And what the moratorium said is, look, no more applications for small convenience center zoning districts. We're sending that to the planning commission. And I'm fortunate that I have a member of our planning commission here who has not yet seen this item. The planning commission will hear this item and be given an overview of the application of the moratorium and the issues related to the moratorium on December 10th at our next meeting. And from there, they will be charged with sorting out the issue of the small convenience center. And we're also going to ask them to sort out, let's put this thing in the zoning ordinance, let's classify it. The application, and those two may run on different but parallel tracks. They both kind of converge at the city council level. So we will see where they go.
And I know there will be a public hearing for the application for the Roy's Market site. Will there be time for public input for the emergency moratorium and sort of the conversation conversation around putting this into our zoning ordinances.
Absolutely, and that is what the planning commission does. The planning commission holds the public hearings. There will be notice of it. I've been directed to put some information out on our city website about the process and the background and why the council chose to take this action. And I would say, and it's a technical correction, it's not an emergency moratorium. The moratorium did not get adopted as an emergency. In fact, it was a 5-2 vote not to do the emergency aspect, which would have put it into effect right away. And instead, it is just a moratorium, not an emergency moratorium.
Do you still have a planned development zone?
No, that
When
went
did
away. But we've also asked, they've asked that the hearing examiner, number one, take kind of an approach like that, call it a community center / mixed use.
And who called this a mission? You or them?
I did.
Then-
Based on the 1992 and 1995 hearing
Understand.
examiner
I
decision.
heard
No, the mission definition wasn't available to us when we were looking at the zoning ordinances, so
Right.
we never used that. Same thing with the homeless shelter, which is not defined anywhere in
You
the code.
see, with all the
But-
deference back to my learned friend here, I still think they have standing vested. I think they're very much vested, and a good lawyer could sort that out real
Well, they
quick.
have a really good lawyer.
So it seems to me that this is kind of two parallels that aren't necessary, when it could be solved in a much easier way. But that's just my opinion.
I have a follow-up question. Is this dead until April? Can we do nothing until April?
No, their application is being processed as we speak.
Yes.
And the planning commission has until April to classify, to put this into the zoning ordinance and to make decisions. So it's not dead in the water, we're still processing.
No, and this is a really important point. There will be public hearings around both the Roy's Market site and the zoning, and so stay alert to those coming up. There's certainly going to be a point for public
So there's
comment.
still a possibility that we can help people this winter?
Yes.
Well-
Okay. Let me clarify that. This is the proposal on this on the Roy's Market site was never intended to be able to be up and ready this winter. What we're looking for is a long-term solution.
I didn't know that. That's a
And-
misconception.
So but this is an important point to make, is that the temporary warming shelters, which have been implemented for, is it over a decade now?
At least 8
Um,
years, 8 years.
At least 8 years. Those were approved by City Council, and those are in
Up and
place
running
this winter.
Right now.
So the reason that we're doing doing the feasibility on this project is because the City Council identified that the current temporary warming shelters are exactly that. They're a temporary solution to the problem, and what we really need is a long-term solution that will be able to sustain itself in perpetuity. So that's why this entire project began in the first place. It was on the auspice of the City Council saying we need to have something like this, and that's why we're looking at this right now.
How many of those are there in the city?
There's 3 right now.
And will this one take care of, will this one replace those 3? Is it large enough to do that?
So yeah, so the 3 are actually revolving, as I understand it, or they'll take different populations. The idea with this is that this would take the place of all those. Yeah.
Take the place of the warming section.
The warming shelters, correct.
Which are now,
church-based.
they're church-based, they do not meet fire code, so they are, because they're largely not sprinkled sleeping areas, so they are reliant on volunteers with radios and 24-hour
Right.
alert.
You know, it seems like this all started in April. This didn't start in April, this started 10 years ago. And a year ago, give or take, when it came to the attention of the community via the city that these church basements didn't have the sprinkler systems, they needed one thing or another. It was right about this time a year ago that we started, when I say we, it was really Rhonda working with the network, which is 47 entities in Yakima that we work with. I have to tell you, and I don't know, Ron, if you asked or if Glenn did, I had this fantasy and which of course had no reality to it, that at the 1st of April, if we hit the deck and we hit it running, we could have had this thing up and running today. Now, that fantasy didn't come true. Right now, my concern, and I have to say, Joan's been wonderful to work with. I have 0 complaints. And I tell everybody that. Right now, I feel like we have to hit the deck and hit it running, or a year from today, we're not going to need it. We're not going to have it. And another winter will go, and another winter of figuring out what church basement and getting the volunteers who stay up all night. Part of their commitment, some of those volunteers, is to stay awake all night because there's no proper sprinkling. It's a very complicated, and from the volunteers, I mean, it's amazing volunteer commitment to do this. And so when I'm pushing the city, I'm worried that a year from today, we're still going to be having this discussion, but we're not going to have a shelter. And so if I sound impatient, it's because I feel impatient.
Well, if we were to fast forward 6 months from today, so we're in April 2015, assuming this specific application for this site goes through with minimal bumps and gets approved, then literally the day after the moratorium's lifted, you could be
We could rock and roll.
Well, the other piece of that is the funding, obviously. It takes a
yeah,
lot
we
of
don't have any
information to
money.
put this thing together, so there's a lot of pieces that need to get put together to make something like this happen. So it's not to say that, the day the moratorium is lifted, we're going to be ready to, have shovels in the ground and have this ready to go.
But that's another point. We can't be going to the county or going to the city or going to HUD. We can't be going to all these places until we know we've got a place to do this. And things are moving.
Yeah.
Can the moratorium be pushed back to February or March, or is this
the moratorium,
cast in concrete?
It can
The
be less
moratorium
than 6 months.
Less than 6 months,
Yeah.
okay. By a council vote, right?
The councils gave us no more than 6 months, okay, so but they also said, can you accomplish it in a more quick time? And they did, yeah, so we're gonna work as hard as we can on that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I was just gonna ask how much time is needed once you have funding to do the redesign to make that place what it's
Well, that's a really good question. We have, it depends a little bit on the funding sources and their underwriting processes. It depends a little bit on our ability to find really clear, simple solutions to some of the sort of technical building problems that the building poses. Theoretically, if everything falls in place and there's no hiccups whatsoever in the rest of the process, we could be breaking ground late fall. And because it's an existing building and not new construction, the construction time would be a little bit abbreviated from what we've seen before. At this point, it'd be a really hard push to have this thing ready by December of next year. I'm not going to stand here and say it's impossible because we've seen projects go ahead that fast before, but it would mean everything lines up perfectly from here on out.
I have a question. To dovetail on what you said, John, about acting as a magnet. I hear from our officers quite a bit that the people that they're dealing with every night, many of whom are not from this area. And two of the problems they say is because DOC, because our jail rental business, we are told that when they're done, they're supposed to be shipped back to their city of origin. That's not happening, so they're let out the back of the jail with no place to go, and our officers end up dealing with them. That's number one. Number two, we are a magnet for mental health people that come over here. Those are real issues that are concerned. Is that something that is being addressed with DOC and to make sure that when these prisoners do fulfill their time, that they're not just dropped off in Yakima and they end up homeless or?
I think that's a question for you, Mike.
So,
I would just.
Well, because
Sorry, go ahead.
the reason why I brought that up is because I know the city manager got hammered for his comment about it being a magnet. Well, every night when I go out with our officers, I see firsthand that we are a magnet. And I don't see that adequately being addressed.
so, I can't speak for the jail. But what I can tell you is we have 10 years worth of data on our homeless statistics. And when we ask and look at the homeless populations, the vast majority of them are long-term Yakima County people. We don't survey the people that are leaving the jail and find out where they go. I mean, we don't know those numbers, but what we do know is about the homeless populations that we identify. And we've got 10 years worth of data that we collect countywide, and they're not people that are coming out, that are coming to us from long-term. Anecdotally, sure, you're going to find those people, but these are not the people of the annual, and I guess I should assume this. We do an annual point in time count every year at the same time, 4th week of January every year. We've got 10 years worth of statistics of data that we're happy to share with anybody that shows where those people come from and how long they've been in Yakima. These are long-term Yakima people. We don't interview the jail people separately. That is a question to talk
I'm
to the
just
TSC.
sharing what I hear from
I understand that, we've heard that
officers,
too. Yeah.
that they're running into these people every night.
Yeah.
Where are they coming from? Where are they, and they're not from here. How are they getting here? How do we fix this? How do we deal with it? I don't have the answer. I'm just throwing it out there.
And
But I
that's,
think you answered it. I mean, you answered it. You said they're not being returned, they're going out the back door.
But
I mean,
the other-
that's part of the answer.
Yeah, the other thing is that, again, on the chart, the other thing that we've heard recently is that people from King County and other counties are flocking over to Yakima, but that King County has a much higher homeless problem than we do, and so do lots of other counties in Yakima, in Washington State.
Well, could it be that because they have such a great problem in King County, that it's easier to access services in Yakima?
No, they have much greater services in those other
Yes.
counties, much greater.
And, yeah.
I think we had another question.
Union Gospel Mission, I recognize it's not in the neighborhood. You have 10 years of data at point in time. How many folks typically are not being served by the mission?
Of the particular population that we're talking about with our project, many of them are not. Most of them are not. Some of them go there for meals occasionally. The Union Gospel Mission is at capacity a lot of the time. But some of our staff, for example, are at the Union Gospel Mission on a regular basis. Our nurses, our mental health staff. So we work pretty closely with them. But the majority of the folks that we're talking about are not served by the mission.
I know the county has been involved in planning for this facility. I know we have a couple of staff members in the county involved. Don't want to put you on the spot, but did you have anything you want to say?
Yeah, we're in the county, so we're separate from Joan, though we are currently working on public input for updating our comprehensive plan. So we're trying to ask the public, what do you see happening in the county? How have we grown in the last 20 years, and how would you like to see it change in the next 20 years? So we're currently seeking input on vast majority of quality of life issues so we can incorporate into our comprehensive plan. So that's where we're at now. We don't have a specific issue or a specific.
Yeah, but I understood the county was involved in soliciting proposals for a facility like this.
I can maybe speak to that, because we actually helped answer that first RFP that the county put together, and really got the ball rolling on this after the city council had sort of shown that this was an issue that needed to be addressed in the city. The county stepped up, they issued an RFP, said, hey, okay, we need someone to put together a proposal for a facility of this nature, and alongside that was a sort of initial commitment of operating funds for the facility, and we've been working with the county through this process. That's still a component to the larger picture of what this is going to look like, and really we're hoping that the city follows suit and says, okay, this is a commitment that the city council has made that we need to follow. We need to back it up with some dollars to actually make it happen as well. So the county's on board, the city we're working on, and we're hopeful that we're going to be able to make that happen.
Doesn't Tim Sullivan with the county doesn't he do an annual count of the?
That's a part of the homeless network, and in conjunction with the county does the point-in-time survey every year. Yeah.
That's what Ron was talking about.
But we're just actually coming more from the perspective where Joan would be, where we would get an application in or something like that. So we don't actually work in the housing section of the county, just in the planning. But the issue with having undefined use, you know, that's something that definitely caught my interest, because we're updating our zoning ordinance right now. So that's a common problem in the planning.
Any last minute questions? Otherwise, I know many of you have to be back at your offices here at 1 o'clock. Not everyone gets away with 2-hour lunches. But please join me in thanking our speakers today. I got lots. Those of you who are able to stay for a few minutes, we'll have a brief discussion of the upcoming legislative